which is a nice segue. Although I want to come to Karate Kid, we're going to wrap in a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the formula because that's such a prevalent movie about gasoline and energy expansion and the whole thing. And you're talking about two actors with as good a chops in that lemon category. Obviously, George C. Scott and Marlon Brando. What was that like? That project like working with those two giants?
Well, again, Steve Shagan wrote a terrific script, The Formula, based on his book by that name. And he had recommended a different actor to star in it. And I said, no, we want George Scott. George Scott, how can you beat George Scott? So
fabulous.
So we went with George Scott. But he hadn't sold too many tickets recently, so the studio said, you need another big name. So I thought, okay, who's going to give George Scott a tough time?
Who can box with him?
And and the only person I could think of was Marlon Brando. So we go to see Marlon Brando. Fortunately, Steve Shagan's lawyer at the time was Marlon Brando's lawyer. So we get the audience with Marlon Brando. Walk in, and he starts talking about how he imagines the character.
Marlon.
Right. This guy who owns all the oil companies and stuff. He said, I see him living out in the desert, and he's barefoot in a straw hat, and he's got a big dish antenna, and
sounds like
blah,
Marlon.
Blah, blah. And I said, geez, I guess you could do it that way. I would imagine this guy looks like Arm & Hammer in a three-button in a three-piece suit and on the cover of Time magazine. And Brando looks at me and he said, you see, I was just testing you. So Marlon was delicious. He couldn't have been nicer. And I said to him, listen, I hear all these stories about you wanting to change the script and the dialogue and everything. Let's change it now. So when we come to shoot it, we'll have it all worked out and we won't blow any time.
Oh, that's sneaky, John. That was brilliant.
So he said, fine. So we did. And I spent many hours with him.
And you did work on it.
Oh, yeah. It was terrific.
How much of quite a bit?
The whole thing. So of his stuff.
Parts, yeah.
So the first day of shooting shows up, and the assistant runs up and says, Mr. Brando wants to see you in his trailer. I said, okay. So I walk in, he looks at me and he says, I can't say this shit. And I said, okay, well, let's find some shit you can say. So
That's beautiful.
we did it again. But he was very, very funny, and had some terrific stuff that when we came back from Germany, the MGM had gone through a change of management, and the guy who had been convicted of forgery at Columbia was now running MGM, and he said, you can't have this scene and can't have. Oh, the scene was in Brando's lieutenant comes up to him and he says, we've got to jack up the price of oil at the pump and so forth, and Brando looks at him and he says, Jesus, you make my father sound like. And we had to come up with the name of a very benevolent character. So we came up with Pat Boone.
Oh, okay.
You make my father sound like Pat Boone.
Right.
So that's what we shot. So when I come back from Germany with the change of management at MGM, the guy says, and you can't say Pat Boone. I said, why not? I said, you can't say that. I said, I bet Pat Boone would pay us to have Brando say his name. Is no. So years later, I met Pat Boone at a party, and I told him the story, and he laughed, and he said that would have made my day.
Oh my God! You're right.
But the story does have a lot of
Prevalent today.
absolutely.
It could actually be re-released today. I mean, that would not be a bad idea to bring those two greats back, and I think it's a pertinent message.